There's a moment when someone truly looks at you for the first time. Not that superficial glance we give everyone, but that deep gaze that cuts through layers. You feel that second stretch out as if time has stopped. Your breath subtly shifts. The atmosphere takes on a different density, and in that precise instant, something is etched, an invisible yet permanent mark. Most people believe that to leave a mark on someone, you need to constantly impress. They endlessly talk about their achievements, show off possessions, overwhelm with excessive attention, try to dazzle with every gesture. They seem to do everything right on the surface, but in the end, they only manage to blend in with everyone else doing the exact same thing. But those who truly understand human psychology know that this is precisely what guarantees being forgotten. Because what marks a person isn't what you do all the time, but what you do just once that no one else has ever done with them. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how to create that kind of impact that not only attracts but generates a psychological bond so strong that the person literally can't stop thinking about you. You'll discover the invisible mistake 97% make that makes them completely forgettable. I'll show you the exact technique applied in 3 contexts you face every week. And finally, the complete system that turns this into a permanent natural ability. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Those who chase, repel. Those who mark, attract. If this has already got you thinking, hit the like button now and let's dive in. Think of a scar as a metaphor. Most people believe a scar is something negative, a wound, a damage. But a scar is also the permanent evidence of a significant moment. It's a physical reminder of something that mattered so much the body decided never to forget it. And that is precisely the psychological dynamic we'll explore today. Let me explain exactly why most people fail miserably when trying to create that unforgettable impact on someone. And it's not for lack of effort. In fact, that's precisely the problem. The fundamental error is confusing attention with impact. You see, when the average person wants someone to like them, they immediately go into overdrive. Constant messages, total availability, excessive compliments, premature gifts, overly quick personal revelations. They believe being constantly present means being important. But human psychology works exactly the opposite way. What actually happens when you behave like this is that you activate the automatic devaluation mechanism in the other person's brain. This mechanism is ancient. What is abundant and easy to obtain instinctively loses value. It's not a conscious decision. It's a neurological response. The brain labels the constant as guaranteed, and what's guaranteed becomes invisible. That's why you don't see your furniture until you move it around. The strategic person, on the other hand, understands that impact doesn't come from always being present, but from being present in a way no one else is. They don't seek exposure time, but depth of impression. They don't try to fill every space, but to create such a stark contrast that it becomes impossible to ignore. The consequences of not understanding this are devastating. In the short term, it seems to work. You get initial attention, perhaps even interest. In the medium term, devaluation silently begins. Your messages are read with less enthusiasm, your gestures are taken for granted. And in the long term, you become part of the scenery, present but invisible, like wallpaper in a room. The most painful thing is that the more you try to compensate for this devaluation with more attention, the more you accelerate the process. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, believing it's water. This pattern doesn't emerge from nowhere. From childhood, we were programmed with the idea that affection is shown through constancy. If you care, you're always there. This childhood programming leads us, as adults, to confuse presence with value. Added to that, the fear of rejection pushes us to overcompensate. If I give enough, they can't reject me. And finally, a superficial understanding of reciprocity makes us believe that constantly giving will obligate the other person to reciprocate. It's like a musician who believes that playing more notes will make their melody more beautiful, when in reality it's the silences between notes that create the tension and desire for the next note. The average person saturates all communication channels. The strategist creates exclusive channels no one else can replicate. Perhaps you've already noticed the signs in your own experience. That moment when you realized your messages received increasingly shorter and more spaced out replies. Or when you made an important gesture and received a thank you that sounded more like an obligation than genuine appreciation. Or that uncomfortable feeling of talking to someone who is mentally already somewhere else. Or worse yet, when you found yourself elaborately planning what to do to regain the attention you once had. naturally. Or even now, when you check your phone waiting for messages from someone who used to text you constantly. It's like having a container with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it will never stay full. And most people spend their lives pouring more and more without ever checking if the container is intact. The most revealing thing is to compare how it feels internally. The average person operates from a constant sense of scarcity, needing to frequently verify that the bond is still there. The strategist operates from abundance, knowing their presence carries weight precisely because it doesn't get diluted by constancy. And here's what few understand. The cost isn't just external in the form of fading relationships. The internal cost is a slow but constant erosion of your self-worth. Every time you overcompensate, every time you chase, every time you try to fix a connection by giving more, you are sending yourself the message that your natural worth isn't enough. And that message, repeated enough times, becomes your subconscious truth. While most people try to engrave their name by writing it 1,000 times in faint ink, the strategist chisels it once into stone. But identifying the problem is only the beginning. Now I'll show you exactly how to create that positive psychological scar, that impact that not only attracts but generates a bond so strong that the person literally can't get you out of their mind. And I'll do it with concrete examples in 3 different contexts you'll surely face this week. The fundamental technique is called significant strategic contrast. It is the deliberate creation of a moment of impact so different from everything the person has experienced that their brain is forced to create a new mental category exclusively for you. It works like this. First, you establish a clear and consistent baseline of behavior, not abundant, but precise. This creates a specific expectation in the other person about who you are and how you interact. Then, at a carefully chosen moment, you create a complete break from that expectation through a gesture or action that has 3 qualities. It is completely unexpected, it is perfectly aligned with the other person's deep values or needs, and it is impossible for anyone else to replicate. The impact doesn't come from the magnitude of the gesture, but from the absolute contrast with the established expectation and the precision with which it touches something profoundly significant for that specific person. Most people create generic moments with scattered energy. You will create a singular moment with perfectly focused energy. Imagine you've been collaborating with someone at work for weeks. The boardroom is full, 8 people discussing the next step of an important project. You've established a professional presence, competent but not dominant. You are clear and precise in your interventions, without monopolizing the conversation. You've created a baseline of expectations. Most people try to impress by speaking louder, interrupting to show knowledge, constantly seeking visual approval, or making supposedly brilliant comments. They seem dynamic momentarily, but they get confused with everyone else doing the exact same thing. By the end of the meeting, their words blend into the general noise. You, on the other hand, remain silent as the discussion heats up. You observe, not just the words, but the micro-gestures of discomfort in the key person when certain topics arise. You wait for the precise moment when tension reaches its peak. Then, instead of adding more noise, you ask a question. A single one, that completely reframes the conversation. What if the problem we're trying to solve isn't really the problem? It's not just the question, it's the perfect timing. It's the slightly lower tone of voice that forces everyone to lean in to listen. It's the calm in the midst of the storm. That question, in that moment, with that energy, creates a vacuum everyone feels, but no one expected. The room changes, glances redirect. The dynamic transforms. And the key person not only hears your words, they feel your presence in a way they never have before. You weren't louder than the others. You were different. And that difference leaves a mark. Because it's not who shouts the loudest, but who changes the conversation who leaves a mark. Now let's take this to a personal context. You're getting to know someone new, perhaps a potential romantic connection. You've exchanged messages, maybe been out a couple of times. You've established a consistent presence, reasonable response times, interesting conversation, genuine attention. Most people at this point start to intensify. More messages, more compliments, more availability, desperately trying to secure interest. They become predictable, and predictability, by definition, doesn't create impact. Instead, after a particularly significant conversation where she briefly mentioned a book that marked her adolescence, you say nothing about it. There's no immediate comment, no attempt to impress. Days later, when you're in a completely different context, you hand her a small package. Not on her birthday, not on a special date, on an ordinary Tuesday. Inside is a first edition of that book, with a simple note. For the part of you no one else has seen. It's not the gift itself. It's that you heard something she didn't expect you to hear. It's that you remembered something she mentioned in passing. It's that you didn't immediately use it to impress. It's that you waited for a moment when there was no expectation. That contrast between the expected, nothing special on a regular day, and the received, being truly seen, creates an emotional impression impossible to fabricate with 1,000 daily messages. In that moment, you're not just another one of her suitors. You're a separate category. Not because you're better, but because you're fundamentally different. And that difference creates an emotional mark her mind will constantly revisit. Because those who seek attention, bore. Those who see the invisible, mark. The third context is digital, where dynamics are amplified by the lack of physical contact. Here, oversaturation is even more common. Constant likes, comments on every post, messages that add no real value, permanent virtual presence. While everyone else competes for attention with volume, you operate with surgical precision. Instead of commenting on every post, you wait. You observe patterns. You notice what truly matters to the person beyond the obvious. When everyone reacts to their travel photo with generic comments, you remain silent. But weeks later, when they share something that receives little attention, perhaps a personal reflection few understand, that's when you appear with a comment that shows you understood exactly what they were saying between the lines. It's not just a comment. It's the recognition of something the person valued but no one else noticed. It's the validation of a part of themselves that rarely receives attention. And above all, it's the contrast between your usual silence and this moment of precise connection that creates the impact. In the digital world where everyone shouts, the one who whispers the right secret creates the most powerful echo. But be warned now, there are 3 critical errors when implementing this technique. The first is confusing contrast with inconsistency. Strategic contrast works precisely because there is a consistent baseline against which it stands out. Without that baseline, it's not impact. It's just erratic behavior. This happens when you try to create too many special moments without first establishing a clear and defined presence. The result is not magnetism, but confusion. The correction is simple. First, establish who you are clearly before showing the exception to that rule. The second error is choosing the wrong moment. Many people apply this technique when the other person is distracted, stressed, or focused on something else, believing they will stand out in that context. What actually happens is that the gesture gets lost in the environmental noise of that moment. Timing is not just when you act, but the receptive state of the other person. To avoid this, learn to recognize the micro-gestures that indicate openness and receptivity. The third error, the most subtle and dangerous, is inauthenticity. When the gesture or action doesn't come from genuine observation but from a calculated strategy, the person will instinctively feel it. The incongruity between the action and the intention creates a feeling of manipulation, not positive impact. If you notice you're planning the effect more than genuinely connecting, stop immediately and return to genuine curiosity about the other person. This works perfectly on the surface, but there is a deeper level that transforms the technique into art, the understanding of why it truly works and how it connects with the most fundamental human needs. Most people believe what we're discussing is about attraction or influence, but in reality, we're talking about something much deeper and more universal, the human need to be truly seen. We live in a world where we are constantly categorized. People know us as the colleague, the funny friend, the neighbor, the suitor, simplified labels that facilitate interactions but inevitably diminish us. Behind those labels, there is a universe of complexities, contradictions, dreams, and fears that are rarely acknowledged. And here's the counterintuitive revelation. What people call chemistry or inexplicable connection is nothing more than the shock of recognition when someone sees a part of us that usually remains invisible. The profound truth is that we don't primarily long to be admired, desired, or even loved. We long to be recognized in our true complexity, because only in that recognition lies the possibility of an authentic bond, not with our social projection, but with our true self. This understanding completely changes the paradigm. It's not about techniques to win over someone, but about the extraordinary ability to see what others don't see. It's not manipulation, it's perception elevated to an art form. Those who understand this operate from a completely different place. They don't think, how can I impress? But what is this person showing that no one else is noticing? They don't seek to stand out, but to understand. And paradoxically, this ability to see beyond the obvious is precisely what makes you unforgettable. I can demonstrate the universality of this principle with a simple observation. Think about the people who have left an indelible mark on your life. Not necessarily romantic partners. They can be mentors, friends, even brief encounters with strangers. If you analyze those moments of impact, you'll discover a consistent pattern. They were people who saw or recognized something in you that you didn't even know was visible. Perhaps it was a teacher who noticed a skill you didn't even know you possessed. Maybe a friend who identified the real reason for your unease when everyone else accepted your superficial explanation. Or a stranger who made a casual comment that revealed something about yourself you had never articulated. These people didn't necessarily make grand gestures. What they did was see beyond your facade, and in that act of true recognition, they created an unforgettable connection. You see it everywhere once you start to observe. Notice how people light up when someone acknowledges an effort they thought was invisible. Observe how the energy in a conversation changes when someone asks a question that gets to the heart of what the other person truly wants to express. Perceive the subtle but profound transformation when someone feels, perhaps for the first time, truly understood. Think about that time someone mentioned something you had said months before, demonstrating that your words had a real impact. Do you remember the feeling? That internal warmth, that deep validation that you not only exist, but that you matter. That feeling didn't come from a generic compliment, but from the tangible evidence that you left a mark. Because it's not who flatters you who marks you, but who remembers you. When you internalize this understanding, something fundamental changes in how you perceive human interactions. You no longer see conversations, but opportunities for discovery. You don't hear words, but underlying intentions. You don't respond to what's said, but to what's unsaid yet profoundly present. The signs that you've integrated this understanding are subtle but unmistakable. You start to notice patterns of communication invisible to most. You don't feel the need to fill silences, but rather use them as spaces for observation. People start telling you things they've never told anyone else without you asking. Situations that were once transactional acquire unexpected depth, and most revealingly, you no longer think in terms of techniques, but develop a genuine curiosity about the complexity of the other person. Someone who has mastered this doesn't need strategies because deep connection becomes their natural state. It's not something they do, but something they are. They don't seek to create impact, but impact is the natural consequence of their heightened perception. It's the difference between someone who studies the movements of a dance and someone who simply listens to the music and moves in perfect harmony with it. Because those who calculate impact manipulate. Those who cultivate vision transform. Now that you understand the deep essence of how to create that unforgettable impact, we're going to transform this understanding into a practical system you can implement immediately. I'll give you 3 concrete tools and a specific plan for the next 7 days that will turn this into a natural ability, not an occasional technique. The first tool is called triangular listening. It goes far beyond simply paying attention to words. It works like this. When someone speaks to you, you listen simultaneously on 3 distinct levels. First, the explicit content, what they are literally saying. Second, the emotional subtext, how they feel about what they're saying, expressed through their tone, micro-gestures, and energy. Third, and most importantly, the significant absences, what they are notably not mentioning but is implicit in their narrative. You use this tool specifically when someone tells you something important to them, when they share a personal experience, or when they express an opinion about something they value. For example, when someone enthusiastically tells you about a recent achievement, instead of responding to the achievement itself with a generic "congratulations," you could say, "It seems what excites you most isn't the external recognition, but overcoming that self-doubt you mentioned months ago." The effect is immediate: a pause, a look of surprise, and then a deeper connection because you responded not only to their words, but to their internal experience. The second tool is calibrated contrast. It's the ability to create intentional variations in your interaction style that break established patterns at strategic moments. It's not about being inconsistent, but about showing different dimensions of yourself that are surprising yet authentic. You apply it when you've established a clear interaction pattern and perceive that the relationship has stabilized at a specific level. It works like this. You identify an aspect of your personality or skill you haven't shown but that is genuine. You find the moment where showing it will create maximum impact, and you present it not as an attempt to impress but as a natural revelation. For example, if you've established an articulate and intellectual verbal presence, you could at a certain point show an unexpected physical ability, like solving a practical problem with manual dexterity no one anticipated. You don't announce it or point it out, you simply do it. The effect is a complete recalibration of how the other person perceives you, creating renewed intrigue. The third tool, perhaps the most powerful, is deep reflection. It's the ability to show the other person a truth about themselves that they haven't even consciously articulated, but instantly recognize as authentic when they hear it. You use this tool with extreme precision, and only when you've gathered enough observations to identify a genuine pattern. It works like this. After observing consistencies between what the person says, does, and values over time, you identify a central quality that connects these elements but has never been explicitly named. Then, in a moment of receptivity, you offer this observation not as an analysis but as a recognition. For example, you could say, "I've noticed that whenever you talk about important decisions, what seems to guide you isn't so much the practical outcome, but a very personal sense of integrity, as if every choice is an opportunity to reaffirm who you really are." The impact is profound. The feeling of being seen at a level they didn't even know was visible. Those who master these three tools don't need to pursue interest. Interest becomes the natural response to their presence. Now, here's the plan for the next 7 days that will transform these tools into natural abilities. During the first 2 days, your sole focus is to practice triangular listening. Don't try to implement all the tools at once. Concentrate exclusively on developing your ability to listen on those 3 simultaneous levels. Every time someone tells you something, a coworker explaining a project, a friend sharing an experience, even a stranger in a casual interaction, consciously activate all 3 listening levels. Identify the explicit content, detect the emotional subtext, and look for significant absences. What you'll notice: the first day, you'll feel a kind of mental tension, like a new muscle you're exercising. The second day, you'll start to pick up on patterns that were previously invisible. Initially, you'll feel a bit artificial or forced, but after 4 or 5 interactions, the process will start to flow naturally. People will respond with a subtle but perceptible openness. Pay special attention to micro gestures of surprise when you respond to something they didn't explicitly say. On days 3 and 4, you maintain triangular listening and add calibrated contrast. Now you're operating with 2 tools simultaneously. When you interact with people with whom you've already established a pattern, you not only listen on multiple levels, but you also introduce intentional variations that reveal unexpected yet authentic dimensions of yourself. The combination creates a multiplier effect. You not only see them with more depth, but also reveal more dimensions of yourself. Here the game changes notably because you break the natural tendency towards categorization. You'll perceive a change in how you feel when interacting. Less concern with impressing, more genuine curiosity. You'll notice a change in how others respond to you. More questions, more sustained attention. And most importantly, you'll feel a transformation in the dynamic. Less transactional, more exploratory. If you experience a slight discomfort when showing different aspects of yourself, it's a sign that you are genuinely expanding your expression. Adjust the intensity of the contrast if necessary, but don't eliminate the creative tension entirely. Days 5, 6, and 7 are for refinement and integration of the third tool, deep reflection. Now you're operating with the complete system. You listen on multiple levels, show authentic yet unexpected dimensions, and occasionally, with surgical precision, you reflect profound truths that the other person instantly recognizes. Specifically observe how the quality of conversations changes, how superficiality gives way to depth without forced effort, how people begin to share significant aspects without the usual gradual building of trust. Adjust your approach based on the receptivity you perceive. Some people need more time before being ready for deep reflection. If you notice resistance or discomfort, it means you've gone too deep too fast, and you should return to listening and contrast before trying again. At this point, you'll start to feel a genuine transformation in your interactions. It's not imagination or suggestion. It's the observable result of having fundamentally changed how you perceive and how you express yourself. But pay maximum attention now, because there are 3 critical errors that can undo everything you've built and transform this practice of authentic connection into its opposite. Error number 1. Using what you observe as social currency. It seems harmless to share your perceptions about someone with others, but it is deeply destructive to trust. This happens especially when you've developed this ability and want to demonstrate your insight to others. The sign that you are falling into this is that you feel an urge to share your observations about a person when they are not present. The immediate consequence is an invisible erosion of authenticity. The long-term consequence is that people will intuit that their vulnerabilities aren't safe with you. The correction is simple but absolute. What you observe in private remains in private. No exceptions. Error number 2. Confusing insight with premature intimacy. After perceiving something deep about someone, there's a temptation to accelerate relational intimacy based on that knowledge. This ignores that authentic intimacy requires time and reciprocity, not just understanding. You recognize this error when you feel impatience to deepen the relationship based on what you've perceived and not on what has been mutually shared. The consequence is a feeling of invasion, not connection. Correct this by respecting the natural pace of trust development, using your perception to understand, not to accelerate. Error number 3, the most insidious, precision without compassion. As you develop your ability to see more deeply, there's a danger of identifying truths that are accurate but whose recognition can be painful if not accompanied by genuine acceptance. It's not just what you see, but how you hold it that determines whether your perception creates connection or harm. You'll know you're in this territory when you identify something about someone that generates judgment in you instead of understanding. The consequence is devastating. A precise observation without compassion is experienced as an attack, not as recognition. The correction requires developing your capacity for compassion to the same level as your capacity for perception. Those who see without judging, who know without using, who reflect with compassion, create not just impact, but transformation. And before I finish, there's something crucial I need to tell you about all of this. Something that defines the difference between those who simply learn techniques and those who truly transform their way of connecting with others. So let's recap, but not as a cold summary. I'm going to give you the 4 pillars that now define your ability to create connections that not only attract, but transform. First pillar. The fundamental problem is not a lack of effort, but the dilution of your presence through excess, creating automatic devaluation that makes you invisible precisely when you try hardest to be seen. Second pillar. The method of significant strategic contrast creates a permanent psychological impact by first establishing a clear baseline and then introducing a moment of connection so unexpected and precisely calibrated that the brain categorizes it as extraordinary. Third pillar. The transformative insight is that what we call chemistry or inexplicable connection is actually the shock of recognition when someone sees a dimension of us that usually remains invisible, satisfying the deepest human need, to be truly seen. Fourth pillar. The integrated system of triangular listening, calibrated contrast, and deep reflection allows you to create not only moments of impact, but a consistent presence that transforms superficial connections into deep and lasting bonds. These 4 pillars are not abstract theory. They are the practical architecture of an ability few develop but all can cultivate. Because those who impress, entertain. Those who recognize, transform. Now comes your challenge, and it starts in exactly the next 24 hours. Not tomorrow, not next week, in the next 24 hours. During this period, you will find yourself in a conversation where someone will share something they consider important. It could be at your job, in a social context, or even in a casual interaction. But it will happen, and you'll recognize it instantly because you'll feel that subtle shift in their energy when the topic truly matters to them. When it happens, I want you to apply full triangular listening, not a diluted or partial version. Listen simultaneously to the explicit content, the emotional subtext, and the significant absences. You don't need to announce what you're doing or make your intention obvious. The beauty lies precisely in its naturalness. Simply observe with complete attention, detect the multiple levels, and respond not just to what is said, but to what is felt yet unexpressed. Because when you do this, 3 things will happen. You'll notice an immediate change in the quality of the other person's attention. You'll feel a deeper connection that transcends the transactional. and you'll set a precedent that fundamentally alters how that person perceives you from now on. This is your moment of truth, your opportunity to prove not to me, not to anyone else, but to yourself that this is not theory, but a real ability you can develop. And after you do it, come back and tell me specifically what you observed that wasn't evident on the surface and how the dynamic changed when you responded on that deeper level. And now the password. Comment exactly this, word for word. Those who see the invisible create the impossible. This isn't just a comment, it's a declaration of intent. It shows that you didn't just consume content, but understood the essence of what we're building. That you are not part of the majority who seek superficial techniques, but rather of the observers. Those who understand that true connection begins with true perception. This is our password, our shared code. I will read each one and know exactly who understood the depth of what we are exploring and who simply skimmed over it. Comment now. And since you've made it to the end, there's something I didn't mention, deliberately. In the next video, I'm going to show you the other side of this equation, how to recognize when someone is trying to create that kind of impact on you, and how to determine if it comes from an authentic or manipulative place. It has to do with patterns of inconsistency that reveal intention, and it explains why some connections that initially seem deep fade while others strengthen over time. But that's a topic for our next conversation. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next video will be out in exactly 7 days. Remember the scar metaphor I mentioned at the beginning? Now you understand that it's not about marking others, but about developing the ability to see what deserves to be remembered. It's not about techniques to manipulate, but about developing a vision that transcends the superficial. You don't need strategies to capture attention because you've developed something infinitely more valuable, the ability to offer genuine recognition. And when you see what no one else sees, you create connections no one else can create. Now go and start seeing the invisible.